To make this model into a hard surface, all we need to do first is to select these circles as shown and extrude inward. Do this for all the circles that indicate the numbers in the side of the dice, then press F to create a face on each hollowed extrusion to close up the hollow. Then we can go on to repeat similar procedure for the numbers on the other sides of the dice as shown. To make this to look a little more appealing, we can bevel the edges and apply a bevel modifier. However, before we do that, we need to get rid of some unnecessary edges on our model. Nevertheless, this may require painstaking effort to accurately select the edges that aren't needed on the model and dissolve them without ruining the topology of your model. Now you can see that most of these edges make up the integral parts of our model. Hence, we can't dissolve them without ruining the topology of our model. However, these edges aren't in any way connected to the vital parts of our model, and we can go on to simply dissolve them. This will give our model some level of simplicity and also provide it with some smoothness. Now, if we go on to shade smooth, the result in object mode isn't quite satisfying, but this can be adjusted by beveling the edges of our model and adjusting the edges around the numbers on the dice. The bevel modifier makes our object to look so much better than what we had initially, but we are not done as it isn't quite photorealistic for a hard surface yet. We can also make it to look even better by adding a weighted normal modifier to further create smoother edges on the surface of our object. You may play around with the settings of both the bevel and weighted normal modifiers, and while I think it doesn't make much difference, I will advise that the weighted normal be stacked beneath the bevel modifier. You may go into the material view mode to continue to work on your model, as this gives a better display of the nature of the model, and it's especially useful when colors and textures are applied to your model and allows for faster observation in comparison to render mode, because simulation of render settings isn't required to view the model. You may further adjust the bevel or weighted normal modifier in the material view mode, and this helps for a better visualization of your adjustments, and you can feel more satisfied with the results of your adjustments on your model. We can select all the outer edges of the dice and bevel them to give the dice a more realistic look. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we need to work on the edges around the numbers to make the model a more perfect and photorealistic hard surface. This is a painstaking procedure that requires moving some of the edges away from the edges of the numbers in order to create a smooth curve around the faces between the numbers and the flat surface. It's also a necessary procedure that's required to widen the hollowed out surface on the mesh and keeps it fairly proportionate to realistic image of a dice. When moving the edges, you have to be careful not to intersect the edges of the numbers. To make this easier, I selected similar edges on opposite sides as shown, and I'm just going to scale them apart to move them away from the numbers as shown. In this case, I had to scale along the x-axis. While scaling opposite edges apart is a faster approach, a more precise approach is selecting the edges individually and moving them away from the numbers. In this case, the edges around the numbers that aren't connected to the numbers are selected. However, this time I still chose to scale them apart to achieve a faster result while ensuring that the edges selected aren't connected to the vital parts of our model on any side. Now, in order to adjust the width of the numbers, we must select edges as shown and scale away from the numbers. Now, to adjust the height, we must select the edges above the numbers as shown and move them up individually for a more precise result. You could also select the edges at the top and bottom of the numbers and scale them apart. We can repeat similar procedure by adjusting the edges on the top and bottom and sides of our numbers for other sides of the dice. You will observe that the adjustments we have made to the edges of the numbers have made them to be more realistic, and you could further go on to observe the result in object mode. The next and final step is to bevel the edges around the numbers on the dice. And in order to do this, you must select all the outer edges without selecting the faces and the inner edges. And just as I did, you could select all initially and individually deselect the inner edges and the faces. It may also help to disable the visibility of your modifiers for the adjustments. Now, just to make sure that we selected all the required edges, we can go into wireframe mode to check all selected edges before we proceed to bevel all selected edges. And as you can see, we have all required edges perfectly selected and we can go on to bevel our edges. Press Ctrl V to bevel and adjust the settings in the bevel properties panel to suit your specifications. We can now go back to turn on the visibility of our bevel and weighted normal modifiers to observe the results of the newly beveled edges around the numbers in our model. Toggle to object mode to better visualize the model, and I think it looks perfect. You may now add materials or textures to your model to get a similar result to what we displayed in our final result. This brings us to the end of our video tutorial on how to model hard surfaces in Blender. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more contents like this, and we encourage you to turn on your notification bell to be the first to see our latest tutorial videos on Blender for 3D modeling and Blender for 3D architectural design. Thanks for watching and bye for now.